The sound of breaking walls echoed through my phone speaker as my drone camera streamed live from thousands of miles away. I had left for a short business trip, but my house, my safe place, was being torn apart by a swarm of bulldozers. Little did the HOA know every second was being recorded and streamed directly to the local police department. I never thought I'd have the kind of neighbors who could smile to your face while planning to destroy everything you own. When I first moved into the lakeside neighborhood, I imagined summer barbecues and evening walks on the dock, and quiet mornings watching the sun rise from my porch. It was the kind of place where houses had wraparound decks, kids rode bikes until sunset, and retirees tended flower gardens with care. On paper it was perfect. In reality, the perfection was tightly policed by the Homeowners Association, better known as the HOA, and led by a woman named Karen. Karen was the sort of person who could spot a chipped paint spot on your garage door from 2 streets away. She had a permanent frown line between her eyebrows, a haircut so sharp it could probably slice paper, and an uncanny ability to show up at your door the very moment you did something she disapproved of. She called it protecting the community's standards. I called it nitpicking, but even in the early days I didn't think much of it. I thought, okay, she's a little intense, but she's harmless. At first it was just the small things. A letter in my mailbox about my trash can being visible from the road. A note about my fence being non-compliant with the HOA's guidelines because it had a rustic finish instead of the recommended uniform modern stain. Another warning about my mailbox. Apparently it was too contemporary for the neighborhood's aesthetic. I laughed at the ridiculousness and tucked the letters into a kitchen drawer, thinking they'd eventually stop. They did. I did, in single quotes. The problem really began about 4 months after I moved in. I painted my front door deep forest green. It wasn't neon, it wasn't flashy, it was just a nice, natural shade that blended with the trees around my property. 2 days later, Karen was at my doorstep holding a printed copy of the HOA rulebook. She pointed to a highlighted line about approved door colors and informed me that my green door wasn't on the list. "We recommend shades of beige, white, or navy blue," she said, in the same tone a teacher might use when correcting a student's math homework. I told her politely that I liked my door the way it was. Her eyes narrowed. "If you're not willing to follow our standards, maybe this isn't the place for you," she said before walking away. I should have realized then that this wasn't going to end with a friendly compromise. Over the next few months, the letters in my mailbox became more frequent and less friendly. They weren't just reminders anymore, they were warnings. Failure to comply will result in action, they began to say, underlined in bold red letters. The vague wording was clearly meant to intimidate. But I wasn't going to be bullied into repainting my door or changing my fence. My property was mine, and as long as I wasn't breaking any laws, they couldn't force me to change it. Or so I thought. When my job required me to travel for a week-long conference in another state, I didn't give it much thought. I'd left my home unattended before. I made sure the doors and windows were locked, the lights were set on timers, and my security cameras were connected to the cloud. I also had my drone, a small, quiet quadcopter I used to take aerial photos of the lake, set up in my garage. I'd recently added a feature that let it patrol my property on a programmed schedule, streaming live video to my phone and backing it up to a private online account. It was a fun gadget, but also a bit of extra peace of mind. 2 days into my trip, I got an email from Karen. The subject line read, "Final warning." The body of the message was short and to the point. "We have been more than patient. If corrective measures are not taken immediately, the HOA will proceed with necessary action." That was it. No specifics, no mention of what corrective measures meant, no deadline. Just a vague threat designed to sound official. I rolled my eyes, muttered something about her being obsessed with my property, and went on with my day. I figured she'd leave another letter, maybe fine me, but nothing more. Still, something about the tone stuck with me. That night, while I was in my hotel room, I opened the drone app on my phone and checked the live feed. The camera hovered over my backyard, the soft glow of the porch light casting long shadows. Everything looked normal. I set the drone to run a morning and afternoon sweep for the rest of my trip. Then I put it out of my mind until the third morning. I was halfway through a meeting when my phone buzzed with a notification from the drone app. Unusual activity detected. 2 vehicles on property. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and tapped the live feed. My stomach tightened immediately. On the screen, 2 large flatbed trucks were parked in front of my house. Several men in reflective safety vests were unloading equipment, big equipment. I watched as they rolled out orange cones and started taping off the driveway. And there, standing in the middle of it all like a queen inspecting her castle, was Karen. Even through the grainy zoom, I could see the smug tilt of her chin. I turned up the volume on my phone, and through the drone's microphone, I caught bits of conversation. One of the workers asked, "We sure about this? Looks like someone lives here." Karen's voice came through, sharp and certain. "The HOA has authority. The structure is non-compliant and must be removed." Removed, or my blood ran cold. I fumbled for my phone's call screen, ready to dial 911. But then I remembered the drone feed wasn't just streaming to me. I had set up an automatic share link with the local police department after a break-in scare last year. They could see exactly what I was seeing in real time. Still, I couldn't just stand there in the hallway of a hotel watching my home get surrounded. My hands shook as I sent a quick text to my neighbor and friend, Mike, asking him to get over there if he could. Mike replied almost instantly, "On my way, looks bad." Back on the feed, the noise of heavy machinery roared through my earbuds. A yellow bulldozer rolled into frame, its wide metal blade glinting in the morning light. Workers shouted to each other over the noise. Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed, her expression almost satisfied. I wanted to believe they were bluffing, that maybe they were just inspecting something or doing road work, but then the bulldozer's engine growled louder and the blade pressed against my porch railing. Wood splintered like dry twigs. The sound hit me harder than I expected. That porch was where I'd sat on summer evenings with a cold drink, watching the lake shimmer. Now it was nothing but broken boards tumbling to the ground. I paced in the hallway, helpless, my co-workers walking past, giving me curious looks. Every crash, every groan of tearing wood felt like a punch to my gut. The drone shifted its angle, catching Karen pulling out her phone and snapping photos like this was some sort of victory parade. Then, through the feed, I saw the flash of red and blue lights. 3 police cruisers pulled up, their sirens cutting through the chaos. Officers stepped out quickly, shouting over the bulldozer's roar. The workers hesitated, looking toward Karen for direction, but she threw her hands up in an exaggerated "what's the problem?" gesture. One officer walked up, straight to her, holding out a tablet. I couldn't hear the words perfectly over the noise, but I caught fragments: unauthorized demolition, private property, recorded evidence. Karen's smug expression faltered. She gestured wildly toward my house, saying something about the rules and community decisions. But the officers didn't look convinced. The bulldozer's engine sputtered to a stop. Workers stepped back, exchanging uneasy glances. The whole scene shifted from confident destruction to awkward confusion in a matter of seconds. Standing there in the hotel hallway, phone clutched in my hand, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The police were on it. My house might be damaged, but it wasn't going to be erased completely, not that day. What I didn't know then was that this was just the opening move in a much bigger fight. Karen wasn't going to give up easily, and the HOA wasn't about to admit they'd crossed a line. But in that moment, as I watched her being questioned by the officers with my drone still hovering above, I knew one thing for sure: they had no idea just how much trouble they were in. By the time my flight landed and I stepped off the plane, my phone had exploded with messages. Mike had sent me dozens of pictures of the scene from the ground police cars lined up in front of my driveway. The bulldozer idling, workers standing around looking like kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. He'd even managed to snap a few shots of Karen being led toward one of the cruisers, an officer's hand lightly on her arm as if guiding her away from the chaos. She wasn't in handcuffs, but the expression on her face said everything. She looked less like the queen of the neighborhood and more like someone who'd just been told the ground under her feet was crumbling. I scrolled through the photos again as I waited for my luggage, feeling a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. Part of me wanted to laugh. Karen had spent months nitpicking my fence and my mailbox, and now she was standing on my property surrounded by cops. But another part of me was angry. My porch was gone, the siding on one wall was smashed in, and part of the roof overhang had caved from where the bulldozer had pushed too far. This wasn't just a close call. They'd already done real damage. On the ride back from the airport, I called Officer Daniels, the local police contact who had handled the scene. He picked up on the second ring, his tone brisk but polite. "Mr. Carter, we've secured your property for now," he said. "No further work is being done." We took statements from the workers and from the HOA president. "Karen," I said automatically, and I swear I could hear him smirk. "Yes, Karen, she claims the HOA voted on this demolition due to code violations. The problem is, we can't find any legal permit, and their supposed vote doesn't hold authority over private property without court approval, which they obviously didn't have." I said, "Correct. The good news is your drone feed captured everything. That's solid evidence. But you're going to want to file a formal complaint for property damage, trespassing, and unlawful demolition attempts. This may end up being more than a civil matter." The word "more" stuck with me. "You mean criminal?" I asked. "That depends on the DA, but from what I've seen, yeah, it's heading in that direction." When the rideshare finally pulled into my street, my stomach tightened. I'd been bracing myself for the sight of my damaged home, but it still hit hard. The front porch, the one I'd built myself the summer after moving in, was reduced to a pile of splintered boards stacked like trash at the end of the driveway. Deep tire tracks carved into my lawn led straight to the crumpled remains of my front railing. Pieces of siding lay scattered like fallen leaves. The yellow caution tape strung between the porch posts fluttered in the breeze. Mike was waiting by the curb, arms crossed. He gave me a sympathetic nod as I stepped out of the car. "It's bad, man," he said, his voice low. "If the cops hadn't shown up when they did, they would have leveled the whole place." I walked slowly toward the front steps. careful to avoid the loose nails sticking up from the wreckage. My drone was parked on the grass near the garage, battery nearly drained from the hours it had hovered above. I picked it up, tucking it under my arm like an old friend. Without that drone, I wouldn't have had proof, just my word against theirs. Inside, things were mostly intact, but there was dust everywhere. The vibrations from the bulldozer must have rattled the walls, because a couple of picture frames had fallen. I set my bag down, pulled out my phone, and opened the drone's video archive. I wanted to watch it all from the start, frame by frame. The footage was even worse than I remembered. Karen had been directing the workers like she owned the place, pointing at walls, gesturing where to start. At one point, she'd actually stepped up onto the porch, tapping the wood with the toe of her shoe like she was inspecting a piece of fruit at the grocery store. She laughed at something one of the workers said, laughing while my home was being torn apart. My jaw tightened as I watched. When the police cars pulled in, the audio picked up everything. The officers told her 3 separate times to stop the work, she argued, insisting the HOA had the right to remove non-compliant structures. One officer asked her, "Are you aware this is privately owned property?" And she'd replied, without hesitation, the HOA owns all property within the community. It was such a bold, wrong statement that even the workers glanced at each other like they knew it wasn't true. I sent a copy of the video to Officer Daniels and called my insurance company. That conversation was as frustrating as it was necessary. They promised to send an adjuster within 48 hours, but warned that since this was a case of intentional damage, they'd be going after the responsible party for repayment. That meant a legal battle was almost guaranteed. That evening, I sat on my couch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the crime scene my front yard had become. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. The message read, "You've made a big mistake bringing the police into this. We'll see how long you last here." I knew immediately it was from Karen, though she hadn't signed her name. The mix of arrogance and passive-aggressive threat was her trademark. I saved the message and sent it straight to Daniels. He called me back minutes later. "Don't respond," he said. "Keep everything documented. This is turning into harassment territory now." 2 days later, the adjuster arrived. As he walked the property, shaking his head and jotting notes, I noticed a few neighbors watching from their porches. Some looked curious, others nervous. One elderly woman actually walked over, leaning on her cane. "I'm sorry for what happened to your house," she said softly. "Not everyone agrees with Karen, you know. Some of us think she's gone too far." I thanked her, though it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. If some neighbors disapproved, that meant others probably supported her. The thought of living surrounded by people who might secretly think I deserved this made my skin crawl. Later, that afternoon, Daniels stopped by in person. He had a manila folder in hand and a look that said he'd been busy. "We pulled HOA records," he said, stepping inside. "Here's the kicker. There was no official vote about your property. Karen fabricated it. She told the board you'd given up ownership due to unpaid dues, which isn't true, and then presented that lie to the construction crew as if it were legal clearance." I stared at him. "She forged HOA authority. Essentially, yes. That's fraud, trespassing, destruction of property, and possibly conspiracy if other board members were in on it. This isn't just going to be a civil lawsuit. The DA is interested." A strange mix of anger and relief flooded me. I hated that my home had been attacked like this, but knowing Karen had crossed so many legal lines meant this might finally be the end of her reign over the neighborhood. That night, as I reviewed the video footage again, I started thinking ahead. This wasn't just about fixing my porch or repainting the siding. It was about making sure Karen and anyone who thought they could abuse their HOA power learned there were limits. And I had the perfect tool to make that happen. The drone feed. Not just the destruction, but Karen's own words caught on audio. It was the kind of evidence that didn't just hold up in court, it destroyed the other side's credibility. I didn't sleep much. Every creak in the house made me wonder if Karen or one of her allies might try something else. My mind kept replaying the bulldozer hitting the porch, the way wood and dust exploded into the air, and Karen's satisfied face. That wasn't just a nuisance neighbor, that was someone who believed she was untouchable. The next morning, I emailed a local news station. I didn't send the full video, just enough clips to get their attention. Within hours, a reporter called me back. She wanted to meet, to hear the whole story. I hesitated, knowing this would make it public. But then I thought about Karen's text, her threat that I wouldn't last here. If she wanted me gone, maybe the best move was to shine a light so bright she couldn't hide. By evening, the reporter had been to my house, filmed the damage, and left with a copy of the video. She promised the segment would air within the week. As she packed up her gear, she glanced toward the street and smirked. "Is that her?" she asked. I turned to see Karen's SUV creeping past, her eyes locked on us. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just kept driving, her gaze cold enough to frost glass. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel nervous about her watching. Because this time, I wasn't the one under the spotlight, she was. And soon, the whole town would know exactly what she'd done. The news report aired on a Tuesday evening, and within minutes my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Friends from out of state were texting screenshots of my half-destroyed porch on their TV screens. Captions like, "Wait, is this you?" flooding in. My neighbor Mike called first, practically shouting through the phone. They didn't just show the damage. Man, they played her voice. Karen's on the 6 o'clock news telling the workers she has full authority. She's done for. The segment had been short but devastating. It opened with sweeping drone footage of my house, my poor porch sagging under yellow caution, tape and then cut to a snippet of Karen's voice from my drone recording. The HOA owns all property within the community. The reporter had raised an eyebrow as she explained that, in reality, no HOA has that kind of ownership without a legal transfer of deed. They interviewed Officer Daniels, who confirmed that no permit had been issued and that the case was under investigation. By the end of the night, the video clip had made it onto social media. It spread faster than I could track, reposted on neighborhood watch groups, local forums, even a couple of national HOA horror story pages. People were tagging friends, arguing in the comments, and calling for Karen to be removed from her position. The words power trip and tyrant came up more than once. The next morning, I noticed something strange as I stepped out to get the mail. Silence. Usually I'd see at least a few people out walking dogs or watering plants. But now, it was as if the whole street had gone into hiding. A couple of blinds twitched when I looked towards certain houses. The tension was so thick you could almost see it in the air. I had just reached the mailbox when I heard the sound of quick footsteps. Behind me it was the elderly neighbor who had spoken to me before, Mrs. Harding, clutching a grocery bag. "You've stirred up quite the storm," she said, her voice low. "Not exactly what I planned," I replied. "Well, some of us are glad. That woman's been bullying people for years, but no one wanted to be the first to stand up. Now they're all watching to see what happens to her." She glanced around before leaning in. "Careful, though. She's not the type to go quietly." I believed her, and sure enough, Karen made her move later that day. I was inside reviewing paperwork for the insurance claim when there was a sharp, deliberate knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw Karen standing there in a pale pink suit, her expression somewhere between fake civility and simmering anger. I debated not answering, but something in me wanted to face her head-on. When I opened the door, she gave me a smile so tight it could have been carved from stone. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone sugary but strained. I wanted to clear the air. I didn't invite her in. "You mean about the part where you tried to have my house demolished while I was out of town?" Her smile twitched. "That's a very exaggerated version of events. The HOA had legitimate concerns about your property's compliance. Certain safety hazards." "Save it," I interrupted. "You didn't have a permit, you didn't have a court order, and you lied about a vote that never happened. The police know. The news knows. The whole internet knows." Her eyes hardened at that. "You've made this a public spectacle, which is very unfortunate. You could have handled this privately." "You mean quietly so no one would see what you did?" I said. Her voice dropped into a lower register, the fake sweetness gone. "I'm warning you, Mr. Carter, this neighborhood has rules. You might win the battle, but you won't win the war." I didn't respond. I just held her gaze until she finally turned on her heel and walked away, her shoes clicking sharply on the driveway. I closed the door, my pulse still pounding. An hour later, Officer Daniels called to tell me that Karen's visit had been noted in the harassment file. "Don't engage with her," he said firmly. "If she steps foot on your property again, call us immediately." Over the next few days, the fallout for Karen intensified. Several neighbors started speaking out publicly. A man named Thomas, who lived 2 streets over, posted online about how Karen had fined him for having his garage door open too long one afternoon. Another woman shared that she'd been forced to remove her vegetable garden because it didn't fit the approved landscape aesthetic. It was like a dam had broken. People were no longer afraid to share their stories. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that Friday evening. I wasn't invited, of course, but Mike attended as a proxy for his wife, who was technically the homeowner on their deed. He called me right after it ended. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Half the board wants Karen to step down. The other half is sticking by her, but they're arguing like cats in a bag. She's not going to have the same control she used to, no matter what happens." Still, Karen wasn't finished. On Saturday morning, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. It was printed on HOA letterhead, but it reeked of her handiwork. In big, bold letters, it read, "Don't believe everything you see on the news. Get the truth from your HOA." It accused me of misrepresenting the facts and claimed that the demolition was part of a necessary safety initiative. At the bottom, it urged residents to support strong leadership and reject smear campaigns. I scanned it, sent a copy to Daniels, and tossed it straight into the trash. If anything, it just made her look more desperate. Sunday was quiet, eerily so, until late afternoon, when I heard a drone buzzing outside my window. For a split second, my stomach clenched, thinking it was mine malfunctioning. But when I checked my app, my drone was docked in the garage. This one wasn't mine. I stepped onto the porch and spotted it hovering about 20 feet up, slowly circling my property. I recognized the model. It was newer, sleeker than mine, with a camera lens. the size of a coin glinting in the sunlight. I waved my arms at it, and it drifted away toward the row of houses where Karen lived. That night, I called Daniels again. "She's trying to watch me now," I told him. He sighed. "I'll add it to the report. The more she does this, the easier it is for us to show a pattern of harassment." By Monday morning, the story had taken another turn. The reporter from the first segment called me back, excited. "We've just learned that the construction company Karen hired has pulled their contract with the HOA," she said. "Apparently, their legal team told them they walked into a huge liability by touching your property. That was the first real sign that Karen's grip was loosening. Without contractors willing to do her dirty work, she couldn't enforce her intimidation tactics as easily." But the real blow came that afternoon. Daniels showed up at my door, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We've spoken to the DA," he said. "They're filing formal charges against Karen: fraud, trespassing, and destruction of property. She'll be served this week." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So it's actually happening." "It's happening," he confirmed. "And with the amount of evidence you've got, I'd say her chances of skating through this are pretty slim." That night, as I sat on my repaired though temporary front steps, I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. A week ago, Karen had been untouchable, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood. Now she was facing criminal charges. Her allies were dwindling, and her reputation was in tatters. But Mrs. Harding's warning still echoed in my mind. She's not the type to go quietly, and I knew, deep down, that even with charges coming, Karen would try one last desperate move to regain control. People like her didn't just disappear, they fought to the bitter end. I just didn't know then how far she'd go, or how much more damage she'd try to cause before it was all over. I didn't sleep much the night after the HOA's so-called accident. The images of my home, what was left of it, kept replaying in my mind. The twisted metal beams, the broken glass glinting in the moonlight, the splintered wood that had once been my living room. I could still smell the dust, the gasoline from the bulldozers, and the faint scent of my crushed garden. My mind wasn't just running on grief, though it was running on strategy. The HOA thought they had just bulldozed a building, but they had bulldozed their way into a federal case without even realizing it. By morning, I had my game plan. I wasn't just going to sue them. I wasn't going to just demand compensation. No, I was going to expose them so completely that they'd wish they'd never even heard my name. My drone's live stream had been more than just a warning. It was evidence, and thanks to the automatic cloud storage I set up years ago, not a single second could be accidentally deleted by anyone trying to cover their tracks. When I drove to the police station later that morning, the officers greeted me with the kind of cautious respect people reserve for someone they suddenly realize has powerful friends. I wasn't wearing a badge anymore, but my contacts still worked just fine. Officer Ramirez, who had been first on the scene after the bulldozing, met me at the front desk. "Morning," he said, glancing toward the manila folder in my hand. "You brought the footage." "Footage, timestamps, and names of everyone involved," I replied, setting the folder down, "plus a full high-resolution recording from the drone, audio included." His eyes widened a little. "Audio?" "Yeah," I said. "One of the crew members bragged that Karen from the HOA told them I wouldn't be back for weeks. You can clearly hear it in the background while they're tearing the place apart." Ramirez whistled softly. "This isn't just property damage anymore. This is looking more like conspiracy and possibly breaking and entering, not to mention the federal property angle." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You know my land has a federal security designation on part of it, right? The Ria Acre is technically a communications relay site. They didn't just bulldoze my house, they interfered with federal equipment." That was the turning point. From that moment I could feel the case shift from a neighborhood dispute to something far more serious. Ramirez immediately called in Detective Collins, who specialized in criminal property cases. Within an hour, my footage was being reviewed by both local police and a federal agent from the Bureau of Land Management. While the authorities were processing the evidence, I took a drive back to the wreckage. I wanted more photos for my own records. As I pulled up, the HOA president herself, Karen in all her smug glory, was standing there with her arms crossed, flanked by two board members. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said loudly, as if she was performing for an audience. "We were just discussing the terms of rebuilding. Of course, the HOA will supervise to make sure it's up to standards this time." I laughed, actually laughed because I couldn't believe her nerve. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you're standing on a federal crime scene. Every bulldozer track, every piece of rubble here is evidence. You might want to step off my property before you make things worse for yourself." Her smirk faltered just a little. "Federa, please. This is a residential neighborhood. Don't try to scare me with that nonsense." "Sure," I said, pulling out my phone. "You can explain that to the FBI when they show up in about 15 minutes. Her face strained of color at the mention of the FBI, but she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down, turning to her board members. "He's bluffing. Everyone knows this was an approved HOA action." That was when I decided to let her talk herself into the hole she was already digging. Approved? Huh, interesting. Because the crew you hired says you told them I'd be gone for weeks and that I wouldn't put up a fight. That's premeditation, Karen, and it's all on tape. She froze for a second, then recovered. Even if I did authorize it, you left your property unattended for too long. It was an eyesore, I repeated slowly. You bulldozed my home because you thought it was ugly. Before she could answer, 2 black SUVs rolled into the street. Out stepped 3 federal agents, all business, wearing windbreakers with bold yellow letters. Karen's expression flickered between confusion and fear. The lead agent approached me first. You're the property owner? Yes, I said. Everything you need is in the police station's custody, but I've got backup copies if you need them. The agent nodded. We'll be securing this site as of now. Nobody goes in or out without authorization. And we'll need statements from the HOA president and any contractors involved. Karen immediately started talking, her voice high and desperate. This is a misunderstanding. We were just trying to enforce community guidelines. His house was in violation of ma'am. The agent interrupted. You are not to speak further without legal representation. This is now an active federal investigation. The look on her face at that moment was worth every sleepless night. She tried to glare at me, but it came off more like panic. Over the next few days, the story exploded. Local news ran with it first. HOA Bulldozed home faces federal scrutiny, but once word got out about the live drone stream to police, it became national news. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors who had once been silent suddenly found the courage to tell their own horror stories about Karen and the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Meanwhile, the investigators dug deeper. They discovered that the HOA's approval for the demolition was nothing more than a forged document. Karen had signed it herself, pretending it came from a so-called emergency board meeting that never happened. The contractors, once confronted with the recordings, admitted they were told that demolition was authorized by the city, but the most damning evidence came from my drone footage. Not only did it capture the destruction in high detail, but the audio caught Karen laughing and saying, "He's going to lose everything. Serves him right for ignoring me." That clip alone turned public opinion into a tidal wave against her. By the end of the week, the HOA was in full-blown crisis mode. Their lawyer tried to negotiate with me behind the scenes, offering to pay for the rebuild if I agreed not to pursue charges. But I wasn't interested in settling quietly. They had bulldozed my home, my memories, and my privacy. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of walking away without real consequences, so I declined, politely, but firmly. "See you in court," I told their lawyer, and as the court date loomed, the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker. Some residents openly avoided me, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Others approached me quietly, thanking me for standing up to the HOA. One elderly man even slipped a note under my door that read, "We've been waiting for someone to stop her for years." I kept building my case. I documented every conversation, every threat, every attempt at intimidation. I knew Karen would try something desperate before the trial, and I intended to be ready. And I was right, because just when I thought things couldn't get any messier, they did. By the time dawn broke the next morning, the small town was already buzzing with the news. The HOA's destruction of my house had made headlines overnight, not just locally but across the state. Every TV station, online blog, and news outlet seemed to have picked up the footage my drone had captured live and streamed directly to the police. Footage that left absolutely no room for the HOA to spin their usual excuses. Every swing of the bulldozer, every splinter of wood flying into the air, every smirk on the faces of those responsible had been caught in crystal clear detail. I sat in my truck across the street from what used to be my home, the smell of dust and crushed timber still lingering in the air. A section of yellow police tape fluttered against the morning breeze, flapping lazily like it had no idea it was guarding the scene of a war crime against my life. I'd barely slept. The events of the last 24 hours replayed over and over in my mind, my neighbors calling me in shock, the police arriving halfway through the destruction, the HOA president's face going pale when she realized the cameras were watching. Deputy Marshal Carter, the same officer who'd shown up the day before, walked up to my truck. His boots crunched over the gravel. "Morning," he said, leaning against the door. "We got confirmation this wasn't just some accidental demolition. They planned this." I glanced at him. "I know they did. The question is, why?" He folded his arms. "Follow the money. The HOA has been pushing a developer deal for months. Your property was a key piece of the puzzle. Without it, they couldn't expand the subdivision toward the lake. You being gone was just the opportunity they needed." I gritted my teeth, and they thought I wouldn't fight back. The officer smirked slightly. "Oh, they know you're fighting back now. The DA's already drafting charges: destruction of property, conspiracy, trespassing, and possibly fraud. And with your drone footage, well, let's just say the HOA board is about to have a very bad month." While Carter updated me, a white SUV pulled up, and out stepped HOA President Linda Harlow herself, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits. Her hair was perfect. Her outfit screamed wealthy suburban executive, but her expression was tight and nervous. She started toward me, but I stepped out of the truck before she could speak. "You've got nerve showing up here," I said, flatly. Her lawyers immediately jumped in. "Mr. Daniels, our client wishes to know," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Your client bulldozed my home while I was hundreds of miles away. Your client lied to contractors, lied to neighbors, and trespassed on my property. She doesn't get to talk to me. She can talk to my lawyer." Linda's jaw clenched for a moment. She looked like she might explode, but she just turned sharply and walked back to her SUV. That was the thing about people like her. They thrived in HOA meetings where they could intimidate residents one by one, but put them in front of someone who wasn't afraid of them, and they crumbled. Over the next week, the investigation went into overdrive. Detectives interviewed neighbors, subpoenaed HOA emails, and pulled records from contractors. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. There were actual meeting notes where Linda and her board discussed removing my house to make way for community expansion, with phrases like "handle it while he's away and don't leave a paper trail." They even approved a payout to the bulldozer company before the demolition was done. But the best part, my drone footage wasn't the only video. Turns out, one of my neighbors had recorded the entire thing from her second-floor window, including Linda laughing with the bulldozer operator before they started tearing down my porch. When the HOA board members were arrested, the scene was surreal. Half the neighborhood gathered outside to watch. Linda was in handcuffs, shouting at the officers about unfair treatment and political vendettas. Her lawyer tried to shield her from the cameras, but it was no use. The news crews were everywhere. That same afternoon, I got a call from a local law firm that specialized in property rights cases. "Mr. Daniels," the attorney said, "we'd like to represent you in a civil suit against the HOA. Based on what we've seen, you could be looking at 7 figures in damages." I didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." The lawsuit moved quickly, fueled by public outrage. For months, the HOA had bullied residents, enforcing petty rules and threatening fines over the smallest things: trash cans left out too long, mailboxes the wrong shade of beige, even kids playing in the street. Now, those same neighbors were showing up to court to testify against them. When the verdict finally came in, it was everything I'd hoped for. The jury awarded me a settlement large enough to rebuild my home exactly the way I wanted, and then some. The HOA's assets were frozen, and the board members were barred from holding any HOA position ever again. The day after the ruling, I stood on my empty lot staring at the patch of land where my old home had been. It was quiet, peaceful, and, for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to the construction crew behind me. "Let's get started." The new house went up in record time. Bigger, stronger, with more security cameras than most banks. I even installed a permanent drone dock on the roof, just in case anyone got any ideas in the future. As for the they dissolved completely. Without Linda and her crew, and with their funds wiped out from lawsuits, they had no power left. The neighborhood returned to something it hadn't been in years: a community where people actually talked to each other, instead of living under constant fear of fines. The night I moved into my new home, I stood on the porch, looking out at the street. The air was cool, the stars were bright, and for the first time in a long while I felt truly at home. I'd won not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been pushed around by people who thought their title gave them the right to destroy lives. Justice had been served, and it was streamed live for the whole world to see. For more unbelievable true stories, like, share, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Bright Reality. Your support helps bring more real-life justice to light.